board. So the next thing for me to do is to introduce myself. I'm Fran Richardson. I work for Action with Communities in Cumbria, and I also manage the community-led homes hub for Cumbria and Lancaster. I'm Becky Winter from Lancaster City Council, and myself have organised these events just to keep the conversation lively around community-led homes and the issues that people are talking about in their communities and with the partner organisations they're working with. We've had conversations today about affordable homes and about working with planned development within, within the planning framework as it exists where you are, and also looking at people planning for later life, co-housing approaches, shared living spaces, and just a different way of approaching conversations about our housing needs. It's been really interesting so far. And I'm really keen to hear what both Paul and Martin have to say to us about how the reclaiming of empty homes redefines communities in a number of ways, looking at the interpretation of skills and arts, and how it brings so many things together to really build strong communities and solve the problem of what are otherwise often blighted areas. There's just a couple of basics I want to say, and again, with apologies to anyone who's already heard this once today, just to set out what I mean when I'm talking about community-led. I think it's important to share an understanding of this. We talk about community-led housing being housing or buildings which are built or reclaimed by local people. Development which is firmly supported by the local community, and development which is owned or managed by members of that community, so that the community has a real lasting stake in it. And fundamentally, all of that benefit to the community is protected legally, so that the investment isn't lost to the community in any sense, drifting over time. I think that's a really important feature of the community-led model, and is, a highly prized asset as far as the communities of action are concerned. The community-led housing hub is part of a national group of hubs who are supporting groups to connect with the people they need to be more effective and to get the results thereafter. We're really trying to encourage people to hook up with the right professional support at the right times, to access the best advice, and to make sure that they're making sensible decisions which help them move forward. We're also really keen on sharing knowledge between groups. So we have a monthly meeting of community-led homes groups for our area. We get together for an hour on a Wednesday evening on Zoom, and people just chew over what's going on and ask questions, and sort of support each other when things are going a bit pear-shaped, and celebrate success with each other as things move forward. It's really nice group, actually. People are genuinely interested in sharing, and that's what I've been really grateful for people's generosity in bringing their stories to these events today. It's been really really great to hear the different versions of events and experience. So without further ado, as they say, just one Zoom etiquette point. If we can keep ourselves more or less on mute unless we're speaking, that would be really helpful. It just minimises background noise. I'm sure you can hear the lawnmower going in my garden at the moment. But the other thing to say is that the chat box will be open. So if while presentations are going on, you think of something you want to ask, do stick it in the chat box, and we'll pick it up later. It'd be nice if you could get involved in the conversation, but make a note of anything you want to add. Then we can pick up on thoughts when across the conversation. So that's great. So I think we've agreed that Martin is going to give us some of the gyroscope story first, which I have to say I'm really looking forward to hearing. So over to you, Martin.
Thank you very much, Fran. Thank you everyone else for attending. I know we were getting into the late afternoon session, so I'll I'll move along quite quickly and give a whistle-stop tour of our work here in Hull, if I can get the show going. So, as Fran said, my name is Martin Newman. I've been working here at Gyroscope for the last 36 years. I suppose when we started, the words community and lead didn't really exist, not put together like that. If you ask me what Gyroscope is, then maybe we've been different things over the years, but I think fundamentally we're a neighbourhood renewal scheme, and that's about being sort of part of the community and from the community, and like Fran says, keeping those assets in the community. We would also describe ourselves as self-help housing, which is another label that's put on organisations like ourselves. I think today, before just giving this whistle-stop tour around the sort of work we do, two things that certainly occurred to me in all these discussions and debates recently about community-led housing. I think two things I would certainly like to get across, and maybe something that can be brought up in discussions later, is one, the value of working positively with your local authority, which isn't something we've always done for all sorts of reasons, but currently we enjoy a good positive relationship with our local authority, and that is pretty crucial to what we do. And the second thing is, I think, just looking at empty homes work as a really good entry point for doing good works in your community. It's just win-win all round. And I know a lot of groups that have started off by trying to build and then run into a lot of problems. I think this process of getting hold of empty properties and bringing them back into use is a much simpler, quicker, and in a lot of areas cheaper ways to go. So, just a bit of geographical context. Hull is a city on the east coast of the UK. It's always kind of looked more to Europe, really. Back in the day, it was part of the, like an honorary member of the Hanseatic League. It tended to have more links across the water than it did to the rest of the United Kingdom. It's often described as isolated, which is a bit unfair these days, but it certainly tends to be a bit of a unique place and has its own funny ways. Obviously, the area we work in once had the largest trawling fleet in the United Kingdom, which started to sort of fall apart in the 60s and 70s. So this neighbourhood which we work in, predominantly Victorian terraced houses, has been in decline for a long, long time, several decades. Gyroscope began back in, well, the sort of roots of Gyroscope are sort of 84, 85. Very, well, I was going to say very different times. We had quite a right-wing Conservative government and a massive housing crisis, so maybe things weren't so different. But we started the organisation, a few people, which was a mix of students, dropout students, local people, some with jobs, some unemployed, got together, pulled what little resources we have, and was able to buy houses, which were extremely cheap back then in Hull, less than £10,000 on the whole. So I don't want to sort of go into big detail about the sort of birth of Gyroscope and how it began, because in a way, I'm not sure some of that would be relevant today with today's house prices and everything else. I suppose just to say that we did start, we were kind of all in this. This wasn't started as a sort of hobby or something to do in the evenings. This was something we kind of threw ourselves into 100%. As you can see from some of the faces here, there was a lot of attitude, which I think back then was the kind of way, really. It was certainly felt a lot more politically sort of divisive society than maybe things are today, but maybe people would disagree with that, I don't know. So Gyroscope sort of continued to grow, buying houses sort of here and there throughout the second half of the 80s and the 90s, and then our community started to see serious abandonment, with people leaving the neighbourhood. Those who could afford to leave the neighbourhood did, and those poorer people were left behind in the neighbourhood. And then the Labour government at the time in 2002 came up with the idea of housing market renewal, otherwise known as Pathfinder, which I know was also in the context of Paul's project was a big thing on Merseyside as well. There was about 9 areas in the north of England and the Midlands that were picked out by John Prescott, who was our local MP, to have vast amounts of their Victorian terraced houses demolished, and ended up with some pretty terrible scenes like the one seen in this picture. These houses have now been demolished. When the government changed in 2010, as part of austerity, the Conservative government cut this project very sort of suddenly, and that led to a lot of streets being sort of left in sort of limbo, really sort of half emptied out, but not fully decanted of people. And it ended up with nothing like the number of demolitions as was originally planned, but it certainly had quite a scarring effect on the neighbourhood. And this was the time that also you had a lot of investors, a lot of buy-to-let investors starting to move in as well and sort of make money buying houses that were going to be demolished and buying houses to rent out that weren't going to be demolished. Up until this time, we'd never really enjoyed a very good relationship with our local authority, but when they were faced with a problem that you can see in this picture, they did kind of turn to us. And I think we, from that point onwards, sort of 2010, started to develop a relationship with our local authority, which has gone from strength to strength. There's been properties they've owned in streets like this that we've either bought or been donated from the council. We work closely with the empty property officer, identifying properties. I think if you get it right, and we don't always get it right, there's things Gyroscope can do with our experience on the ground, our real local knowledge that the local authority can't do. And then there's things that the local authority can do that we can't. So if you get that relationship right, that kind of elephant and mouse relationship, it can work really well. Obviously, sometimes it ends up with the mouse being trodden on, but that's, you know, if with a positive relationship, I don't think that's inevitably the case. Again, going back to this theme of neighbourhood based, this doesn't show all our properties, but it shows probably 95% of them. So we are confined to a local neighbourhood. We don't work in East Hull. We don't work in East Hull. In North Hull, we are confined to the west of the city. We have the odd property, say, outside of this, but on the whole, we concentrate very heavily, even to the point of like 25% of our houses being in a couple of streets, the little cluster of red blobs you can see there. Also, some of our non-residential buildings and our offices are also within that neighbourhood. It makes the whole housing management thing a whole lot easier when you know your community and you know your neighbourhood. Just some quick sort of examples of some of the work we do. I mean, this is a classic buy-to-let property. This is actually 2 properties, 3 flats in each. 6 investors got together from the south of England. Some were rich, some not so rich. They bought these 6 flats and then argued amongst themselves and left them empty for 12 years. They employed a Hull builder who started some work and then ripped them off. So on and so on. He did bits of work in each flat, sent them photographs and claimed he had like completed work, and they sent him money, and eventually it all went wrong. He went bust, and they were sat on these properties for, say, they were empty for about 12 years until we managed to purchase them. We had to do deals with all 6 separate investors, and some of them actually lost money on it. So it can be quite hard work with some of these more complicated ones, but we managed to get that one. We've now done it up. The property's let. We've got a range of people in there, but there's three really nice flats. This is probably more sort of indicative of the work we do. 2 small 2- and 3-bed terraced houses. You can see this one, the transformation. And again, working with the local authority in a sort of strategic way. The local authority came along in some of these streets and have done solid wall insulation and the boundary improvements that you can see at the bottom of the picture, the railings and the walls and so on. So you kind of get that double effect of Gyroscope making the investment, buying the properties, and then the local authority sort of adding those extra bits at the end for street scene and heat loss purposes. This is inside that property. It was a fire damaged property. There's before and after shot Another property, this was owned by an out-of-town investor, buy-to-let investor, who actually died before she got the chance to, I think she actually died quite elderly as well. It wasn't like she died suddenly, but she just had this property empty for years, didn't really know how to bring it back into use, or didn't have the money to bring it back into use. It got inherited by her son, who was a student, who just panicked, got loads of letters off Environmental Health. We did a deal with him, bought the property, brought it back into use. So it looked like this when we got it. Pigeons had made it their home, and we got it looking like that. And now there's a family living in there, and it's more or less like a new build, because it was literally everything was ripped out. A slightly more modern property that Gyroscope did recently. This was a block of 5 flats, a 3-storey building that was an 80s build. So we put air source heat pumps in these underfloor heating, and they've now turned out like this. And this was it's quite a different project for us, because we're so used to Victorian houses. But again, it was a block of 5 flats. It had been bought by investors from Ireland, who I think had basically been ripped off in the noughties. It got repossessed by Bank of Scotland and then went in a London auction about 4 years ago, where we purchased it. This is, again, just a shot of what the local authority's done in our neighbourhood in terms of the frontage improvements, the solid wall insulation, the brick slips on the bottom there, which is kind of tidied up the whole street scene. This photo was taken a couple of years ago. The girl on the bicycle, Millie, sure she won't mind me using her name, is now has a baby and lives in one of our houses, but that was in her younger days when she just used to cycle around the neighbourhood, causing a certain level of mayhem. But she's turned out to be brilliant now. She's really good now that she's got a kid and stuff. Again, bit of local knowledge and all the rest of it. We work a lot with what we call volunteers. Some people might call them clients, but people come to us who are disadvantaged in the employment market for all sorts of reasons. We've worked a little less with probation recently, because probation's not been in a particularly healthy state, but we've done a lot of work with probation. So we've had a lot of people come to us who have an offending history, and we just get them back into the whole sort of working mentality before they move on to employment. This chap here had spent quite a lot of time inside. He then came to us as a volunteer, then became a tenant. Then we employed him, and now he's gone the full journey, and he's now gone self-employed, and he's now our plumber. So we give him, well, enough work where we're his sort of main client, really. So it's doesn't always work out like that, but when it does, it's kind of really good. And it's I mean, the guy here, he had to make the changes in his life to make this happen, but we were able to provide the something to do and that kind of framework within which to work. Another lad here, Danny, who's came to us, learned how to plaster, and now is a self-employed plasterer. So again, another success story. Not everyone that comes here will have that story, but obviously we put them on the slideshow, the successes. About 10% of Gyroscope's housing is let to refugees. We work again with the local authority with their refugee service. So we've worked on a couple of African programs, and obviously more recently Syrian programs, which Anas on the right here, who's a Gyroscope tenant, came over on the Syria program. And here he is being shown, well, not being shown, he was an electrician, but working with one of our members of staff, Hannah, on a derelict property. He volunteered with us just to get his kind of hand in at doing electrical work in the UK, so he could go off and get all the various tickets he needed to carry out his work in the United Kingdom. Two more of our volunteers there, Andy and Reg, working in a derelict house. Both of these we also provide maths and English tutoring for. They came to us both with a really poor literacy. Just a quick look at who we house. I mean, our housing is open to anyone, but obviously a majority of people that come to us are people that come to us with a housing need or are in fact in housing crisis. We house a lot of people. Hull now is home to an awful lot of people from Eastern Europe. We employ a lot of people from Eastern Europe, and we house a lot of people from Eastern Europe, more recently Romanians and Bulgarians, previously Polish people and people from the Baltic states as well. Just a very quick look before I finish, just how we pay for it. We work with a social investor, social and sustainable capital, which provide us with, they provided us with blended finance, which is a mix of grants and loans when they managed to access grants. I think the grant we got was via Power to Change, but through social and sustainable capital. We also borrow the risk element, so the unsecured part of our finance. We bank with Handelsbanken, and we have banked with different banks, but that's who we're with at the moment, where we basically borrow large amounts of secured finance to purchase houses with. And then we, like any third sector organisation, go out there and get the grants from the likes of Tudor Trust, Lloyds and so on. Obviously, we have a rental income. Gyroscope at heart is a business. You know, it's our rental income that pays those loans off. And we've now recently sort of started to get some enhanced housing benefit for about 30 of our tenancies. We have about 130 residential units in all, and on 30 of them we claim for supported housing, for enhanced housing benefit. I put prudential borrowing there. That's not something we've actually used, but it is something we are looking at. And again, this is about your relationship with your local authority. Potentially, you can borrow money off your local authority at a fixed interest rate of about 2.5%, 3% over 30 years, which is certainly something worth considering. They're not just going to throw that money around to anyone, but if you've got a bit of a track record and have built up a relationship, then that's a possibility. Here's some numbers here, which I haven't updated this week because I think just about all these costs have gone up every week in the last year. We attended a property auction, an online one, last Friday, and I would say the top figure now probably needs to be about £50,000 for a wrecked house in Hull. And the price of building materials has obviously gone through the roof as well. So I would think the renovation costs would be a little higher. But it just gives you a kind of breakdown. In my experience, a lot of organisations that try and bring properties back into use, especially a lot of the supported housing organisations, don't have a high enough renovation costs. They buy houses and then try and patch them up. I think if you're going to do this properly, you've got to spend the money, you've got to do it right, and then you've got to maintain the properties. You know, I think it's, you know, I've come across organisations that on paper do wonderful things, but when you see where the tenants live, they live in houses that are full of black mould, that aren't ventilated properly, that aren't renovated properly, that aren't insulated properly. And I think in the third sector, that's something we got to get right. If you're going to be a landlord, then you've got to make sure you do it right as best as you can. And then just a quick look at the bottom, just a mortgage calculator, just to give an idea of what that kind of, how that looks in terms of paying that money back if you borrowed it from the bank. Just to kind of, I suppose, again, when some organisations get into becoming landlords, I think often organisations think just because we're nice people doing good that, you know, all the people we house this will all be reciprocated and everything will go wonderfully. But I suppose I've just made a list there of all the things we've encountered from time to time, and sometimes quite regularly, which you've got to be prepared to deal with. The third from the bottom seems to be the something that is we're coming across with more and more regularity, the hoarding, which is a real problem. It's a real health and safety issue, fire problem. Not to mention when hoarders move, you've got a very large rubbish disposal bill as well. We have also taken on a few different empty buildings in our neighbourhood. We bought this one off the local diocese for £1. It's the only remaining Church of England sort of spire in the city. The planners and the Luftwaffe did for the rest of them. We are working on the redevelopment of this building, going to put mezzanines down the aisles, put some rooms in there, and get it let out for sort of other community groups and as office space, and have the nave. The pews are now gone as like a function area. I still think we were ripped off at £1 because I think there's some serious liabilities there. As well as the people volunteering on our construction project, we also run a garden project. We have a piece of land behind 3 of our properties that we've made into a community garden. We have a bike recycling scheme So you can see Adam here on the right, and a couple of lads working with him. Seems to have turned into a bit of a Men in Sheds event, the bike project, but it's another good thing for the neighbourhood, getting bicycles in there, getting them fixed, getting them out for people to use. And just to finish, really, just after all our experience of doing what we've done with empty properties, we've had a crack at building some houses, literally out the back of the building I'm sat in here. So a building we bought off our local authority. We're using a modern version of the water seagull method to build 3 houses. Today, we're on year 5 of this, and most of that time was obviously spent with planning, and then with planning, and then with planning again, and architects and structural engineers, and so on and so on and so on, which of course we've never really had to deal with, particularly with empty homes. But again, lots of volunteer involvement, lots of different skill sets. This is what it looked like in the winter, and this is what it looks like about a week ago. So we're close to finishing. We hope to have them finished this year. 2 2-beds and a 3-bed, solar thermal, solar PV, super insulated, all electric, no gas. And they're literally in the kind of backyard of our offices. And this is something we'd like to repeat. It's not cheap, but with house prices going up, it may become more realistic. And that's it from me. So that's a quick tour around the gyroscope project in West Hull. Thank you very much.
That's absolutely brilliant, Martin. Do you want to stop sharing your screen? Fantastic, fantastic. Wow, brilliant. I'm completely in awe. It was really lovely to see the range of things you're involved in and the impact that you've had. Amazing, amazing, amazing. And wonderful that you can show us real people whose lives you've changed. You know, I have to say, when I heard about Gyroscope probably 3 years ago, I kind of assumed that it was something that had cropped up in the last decade. And when I did a bit of homework and found that you'd been doing this for 30 plus years, I was really impressed that you've absolutely found a way of functioning which is clearly needed where you are. And but great to see that you're so fleet of foot in terms of taking on new buildings and like the church, different sorts of buildings, and dabbling in the new build. That's interesting too. But you know, the impact you've had on those areas where the you know, empty properties, the transformations are just extraordinary. So thank you very much indeed for showing us those images and sharing your words. We'll have loads of questions for you, I'm sure. Just see if anybody's got burning questions right now before we move on to Paul. I think we were hoping we could leave questions till later, so shall we just move straight on? Is that okay with everyone? And we'll get into Paul's take on things from Liverpool and come back to more wow, I'm sure. Fantastic. Thank you very much, Martin. Over to you, Paul.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Martin. That was fantastic. And again, I hadn't heard the presentation. I obviously knew about you, but it's just great to hear. And I think some of the stuff I'm going to touch on will probably pick up on some of the themes. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about Home-Based Community Land Trust. I'm picking up where Martin was talking about in Hull and housing market renewal. Here we have Anfield in Liverpool, which people probably know the name of. The 2 football clubs, Anfield and Everton, sort of very closely linked. And the Anfield community was one that also was subject to the housing market renewal kind of impacts. Liverpool's a really interesting place, and I think it kind of touches on a little bit some of the stuff you've talked about with Hull. And Liverpool is a city that's lost 500,000 people have left Liverpool over the last 70 years, 80 years. So it's something that's still not really grasped by policymakers and local authorities because it's such a huge issue that the city has been trying to deal with. And I think over the last 100 years, there have been only a few years within that time that Liverpool hasn't been an area of special economic support. So it's a city that has an infrastructure for 500,000 more people. And the people that have left are the economically active. So you're left with a city with real challenges. And every time a new regeneration initiative comes along, it tinkers at the edges, and then it folds, and then another one comes along. And funnily enough, Martin, I used to work for Liverpool Housing Action Trust, and I know there was a Housing Action Trust in Hull, and a number of my colleagues worked on the Hull hat. And then Housing Market Renewal came after the Housing Action Trust programme, and completely ignored the processes that we had kind of tried to embed in the city. So it was a very brutal programme, and personally I sort of feel that how the Housing Market Renewal programme was implemented was maybe not what John Prescott envisaged. I kind of give him that credit. I think how it was implemented in Liverpool particularly was really quite shocking. And the people running it, and I was quite involved at the time also, really thought they had got the solutions to Liverpool in hand through the Housing Market Renewal programme, and actually they just decimated the city further. So it was quite interesting. The issue of Anfield is also quite a poignant one, because Anfield on paper is what would be described as the perfect neighbourhood. So it was a neighbourhood where the merchant seamen in their big detached villas lived alongside the 2-up 2-down terraces of the dock workers. And it had all the infrastructure of what a community would need, including a very vibrant high street, a very successful football club. There is even still the dairy area where the cows were when the first dairy was built in Anfield, and that still exists, where the cows were housed to actually milk the people of Anfield. So it kind of was, it had all the infrastructure you kind of needed to make a flourishing neighbourhood, and somehow still the policymakers managed to pull it apart. And when Housing Market Renewal came on Liverpool, you know, we had these signs all over Liverpool. There's a great sort of history of neighbourhood renewal signs all over the city. And this was the Housing Market Renewal one in the city, which was the Brighter Anfield is coming. And we're still all holding our breath for the Brighter Anfield to come. But it's just interesting, that approach to kind of community and neighbourhood renewal. And the Home Bake project as well, it resulted in massive amounts of demolition and boarded up houses, and people moved on and communities split up. And these were houses that people had lived in. They were offered very little money to sell their properties. And the population decline that had happened had meant a lot of the streets were half empty, and people who could leave had left. But it was kind of marked in Anfield, particularly because of the football club and the amount of wealth that football club generates. Liverpool is still the most visited place on Merseyside. The museum there, every day people are shipped in taxis and shipped out. So there's something about the wealth of the community not working for the people that lived there. And I think when I got involved about 13, 14 years ago, I was jointly funded by the Housing Market Renewal Programme and the Arts Council to actually look at some creative interventions into the Housing Market Renewal Programme. And part of the approach we took at that time was one of almost provocation. I don't know what it's like in Hull particularly, but in Liverpool, the communities, we have very vibrantly vocal communities. And so people would love to come to meetings and really lay into local councillors, council officers, shout at them, be really angry about this process. And then after a 3-hour meeting, at the end of the meeting, they would leave and say, but you still carry on and sort this out. So we started a programme of kind of gentle provocation, really, with the community to say, actually, either stop moaning about it or start doing something about it. Isn't this the moment of you becoming much more active? And I suppose we suffer a little bit for that whole issue of municipal socialism, where the leaders do it for you and people don't feel a need to be very active. And we started working with an artist from Holland called Jana van Hesvik, and she had done quite major interventions in social policy work in Amsterdam, and indeed she works globally. but she's somebody who kind of uses the process of regeneration and change and neighbourhood renewal to create discussions amongst communities about their own ownership. And after a couple of years of just being in the community and talking to people, we focused in on this bakery. So the Mitchell's Bakery in Anfield is actually directly opposite the football club. And the Mitchell family had owned it for 80 years, almost since it was built. And it was built as a bakery for the community. And they had been subject to compulsory purchase orders for the last 15 years. And they were in their 80s and they just couldn't go on anymore. They couldn't run it anymore. And they wanted to sell it, but they couldn't sell it. Like lots of people, the housing renewal program had finished abruptly and they were just stranded with this building. And so the community started to say, well, maybe we could do something with this bakery and maybe we could use it as a base for discussion and debate. And so probably about 12 years ago, we rented the bakery from the Mitchells and we used it as a base for discussion. It was pretty much falling down around us, but it was a hub for people to come and talk. And kind of, it was a very, very, a place that people really resonated with in the community. They felt very much connected to it and connected to the family. And so it kind of became a kind of space where people could actually come together and talk about how people wanted to live, work and play better in the community and how they could play a role in the unfolding renewal of the place and the change of the neighborhood, because the community was going to be changing. So I think it was about 2009, I think, that we started to work in the space. And as I say, it was kind of falling down. And it was a group of women particularly who came together and said, we believe we could continue to run this as a bakery. Now, the aspiration of the local council was to demolish the whole of the high street of Anfield and to build back what you can imagine, the usual kind of low-level kind of commercial spaces with flats above it. And their mantra was, you know, if we get a Tesco Express to maybe move into one of these units, we're doing well for the people of Anfield. And this group of women said, actually, we believe we could run it as a bakery and we could run it as a successful bakery. So in 2012, after lots of talking and lots of engagement and connecting in the bakery, we established a community land trust. So the Home Baked Community Land Trust was born, and the Home Baked Cooperative Bakery was also born at the same time. And initially it had lots of the same people involved, but it actually ended up as two very independent organizations. And the bakery, now almost 9 years on, is now a fully successful business, cooperative business. It employs 22 local people, some of them all different hours to fit in with family life. Everybody lives within a mile of the bakery who works there. It's often seen as a place where people can come through. They start as a volunteer, they then get some work, and people then move on into other businesses or set up their own businesses. So it's very much, and the space is almost like a health and well-being space for the community. It's a place that everybody comes. And also it's been hugely supported by the football supporters. Obviously we haven't had matches for a while, but that has helped generate kind of the brand of Home Baked that has also been bought into by the football club, Virgin Trains. Lots of people buy their pies from the bakery. And they're also damn good pies. So that's worked and has shown people that actually you can support community-led businesses to thrive if you have the right infrastructure around them. And the Land Trust, Home Baked Cooperative Bakery, is the first tenant of the Land Trust. We own the building, and there's some pies. And we also then developed the flat above the bakery. So this was its state probably about 4 years ago. We worked very collaboratively with the local community. This guy here, Bradley, on the right in this picture, he was a young person who came on, did an apprenticeship, working on the project, working with the architects and the builders. He's now at St Martin's College in London, training to be an architect, with the intent that he will come back to Anfield and set up an architecture practice in Anfield. And he's just joined the board of Homebake Community Land Trust. So the Land Trust now has its first home in Homebake, which is now a 4-bedroom maisonette that's rented out. And that also is bringing in income to the CLT, but we're also able to keep rents low, both for the commercial businesses and the properties, so that people can have more money to spend in their local community. The ambition of the Community Land Trust is to own the whole of the high street in Anfield. We believe that, particularly in Anfield, it's been blighted by absent landlords who would make enough money on a match day to keep the businesses shut for the rest of the week. So the community feel that that's not going to create a sustainable neighbourhood into the future. So our ambition now, and that's starting to align with some of the political aspirations in the city, is that we should look to buy up properties along the high street and put them back into community ownership. And through the Community Land Trust, we are supporting other community enterprises to set up. So this is the terrace. On the bottom right is the bakery. This is a terrace, I think it's of 13 properties that the Land Trust has been working on for the last 3-4 years now to redevelop as 8 more residential properties and 3 more commercial business spaces. And there'll be a mix of houses, flats, and these buildings are being reconfigured. High environmental standards as part of it, but also bespoke businesses as part of it as well, supported. At the end, there's a park that we're developing that goes behind the terrace as well as to the side of it. And so the Land Trust, by hopefully September, will have gone on site to develop out this terrace, and that will be all in the ownership of the Community Land Trust. And there's the design. The property at the end on the left side will be a business called Homegrown Collective, which is again a group of, as they call themselves, middle-aged women from Anfield who have started to grow hops in the community, and they've just started brewing their own Anfield beer, and they've just launched that about 6 months ago. They will have a brewery based in there that they will run as a collective, as a cooperative, so they will become the second tenant of the Land Trust. And we are also working with other young people in the community and schools to develop more community businesses that will go in other properties. So the idea is we would then work on other terraces and slowly take back the high street into community ownership. So that's me. That's Homebaked, a bit of a community approach to regeneration and neighbourhood renewal.
Fantastic. Love it, Paul. Thank you very, very much for sharing that with us. Really lovely to see that. Amazing vision, and just lovely to see the progress and the patience and the challenges that you've dealt with already, and that you can see coming down the road, but you're just ready to take it all on. It's wonderful. Thank you very much for sharing. Right, so I'm going to open up to questions now. If people want to stick their hands up on the screen or stick their virtual hands up, that would be fine. Please do chip in. I can see Becky's already there, so I'll let Becky straight in. That's great.
Hi, yeah, both fantastic presentations, so thank you. My first question is for Martin. You've volunteers who are getting involved with the renovation, and then some of them go on to become tenants. Are they 2 separate paths though? One doesn't, you don't have to volunteer to get a home, and vice versa.
No, I mean, they're absolutely not conditional, no, and at various times, because the volunteer thing is probably the hardest thing we do, and getting staff who can do building work and look after people and help them is not easy, and often it's failed and not worked. But No, there's no conditionality there, but we try and get tenants, especially the tenants we've got on support, we try and get them to do something volunteering. I mean, we also have a little cooking project we got going now, and even if it's just coming in and doing, doing some training, doing some cooking, things like that. I think with all the people that have come from overseas to Hull, there's a much bigger thing about food than maybe the kind of indigenous English had. So I think that's something we're really learning from we've got tenants from the Congo and from Israel and from Syria and Iran and Iraq, and the whole thing with food is such an obviously Paul's project, which has been built around food. You really start to realise what kind of thing that is. But yeah, we will try and get our tenants to volunteer, and if our volunteers need housing, well, some of them we have housed, yeah, but some of them need housing, but our housing isn't appropriate for them, or they're not appropriate for our housing, whichever way around you want to look at it. But yeah, I mean, obviously, someone volunteering is a great way to get to know them. That is much more likely to make the tenancy succeed. So you might find out that that person isn't really someone that's going to work, or isn't ready to, get their own place. I know there's other projects like Latch in Leeds who have done really great work where they involve prospective tenants very specifically in the renovation of their properties. And I think that is an interesting model how they've done that.
But so your volunteers are volunteering. There's no sweat equity.
No, I mean say we call them volunteers, but really, it's very rare that someone comes here who is just saying, "Oh, I've got some spare time. Can I come?" It's normally people will have been signposted here, and they have some type of barrier to employment. I mean, that can be learning difficulties, that can be mental health problems, that can be a prison sentence or an offence that means getting jobs quite hard. We'll help them get CSCS cards, we'll help them access to training and do the usual kind of training stuff. So we try and put as much back as we can, but yeah, no, they're not. The idea is day one, we're looking to get rid of them, really. Sounds mean, but that's we do end up with a problem. Well, it is a problem where we have people that we can't get rid of. They either like it here too much, or we don't make enough effort, or they don't make enough effort to move on, and then of course that starts to kind of clog your volunteer program up, and you have less space for new people coming. I mean, that's, again, I'm sure all will have experienced the same thing. That is just a real challenge of doing something like this.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's great. I worked in homelessness for a long time before I came into work at the council, and what people do, everyone needs something to do as well, and where to live, and that's having seen people going through the cycle of hostels and homelessness, it's not enough to just put a roof over someone's head. So giving those options as well, opportunities, is great. And so my other question for Paul is, how did you grow the community? Sometimes in areas that are more deprived, there's obviously a lack of belief that anything can change and anything can happen, and as people feel despondent. And how did you see that community come out of the woodwork effectively?
Yeah, I think what was important was having a space. So we took over the bakery, and it had an identity for people. So just seeing it open, people wanted to come in and just to have a nose around, even though it was in a pretty bad condition, really. And I think having an artist from outside being involved, although people often say, "Oh, you shouldn't bring in outsiders," actually it was really critical, because she was able to she didn't come with the kind of expectations being low. It was about having very high expectations. I think the third thing that kind of runs through everything is that, and I suppose we found this through COVID, is that communities like Anfield on paper would be seen as being deprived, but actually they are the most connected and supportive communities that you get. And that's been shown out through things like COVID, about, these communities looked after each other already. They supported each other. And there was it was kind of interesting, that link between, one of the key women involved in the bakery that's set up, her family had owned a 5-bedroom terrace right by the football club, and they'd owned it for decades. And her mother used to be the maternity nurse in the community in the 50s. So everybody had been born. She had born. But she was kind of one of the professionals of the community, and she had been a head teacher, and yet she had gone through 20 years of 15 years of potentially having her house demolished. Now that Anfield's been refurbished, her house actually looks out on the new plaza in front of the new stadium. So she's finally got some comfort. So there was a real leveler as well of people. Everybody was in the same boat. So that brought a real connectivity. And the social angle is really important. I picked up that from Martin. This is about people and people connecting with each other and socializing and working together. And I think you need that as part of it before you then create a concept. And I think, as I said, it took 3 years before we got to the point of saying, well, we want to set up a land trust, we want to set up a cooperative organisation, and that was 3 years of just connecting with people.
Can I ask, Paul, what were you before you were a land trust? What were you when you took on the bakery?
Well, the organisation I worked for that was funded through the Arts Council and Housing Market Renewal, we rented the bakery.
Okay.
From the owners. Yeah.
I see, that's great. And I've got a question for Martin as well, if I may, while I'm abusing my prerogative as host, about your, I don't know which word to use, ambition. What are you, the sort of scale that Paul showed us has a nice clear geography and it's got a boundary, but it might grow and it might turn into all sorts of other things. Do you have you've got a clearly defined geography, but it's quite big. It's not that you're aiming to own all of those houses or have that kind of reach. So is your mission more the social change that you're bringing about through helping people, or is it about a vision of the housing that's provided in that area?
I think it's quite important in our line of work to have kind of an adaptable vision, if that's not a cop-out of an answer.
No, that's fine.
But yes, I mean, it's, up here in Hull, it's, I talk to, my accent probably gives it away. I'm not from Hull originally. I've been here a long time, but I seem to have developed a London accent since I've lived here, which is strange. But I've been involved in like housing debates with, and people from the southeast. They are on some level dealing with a completely different problem to the one we have in Hull. There isn't a shortage of places to live in Hull. Obviously, with the migration this city's seen in the last 10 years, in the last 5 years, it's become a fuller city. But like Paul was saying, I think Hull's population decreased every year since World War II. Some of that has been reversed by some inward migration from overseas. But the problem here in Hull is far too much of the housing is in the PRS, in the private rented sector. Far too much of that is owned by basically either mean or just crap out of town landlords, buy-to-let landlords who own 1, 2 or 3 properties. And it's then about security of tenure. It's about the quality of the houses. So I would say that Gyroscope is quite ambitious, and we will look at models and finance models and all the rest of it where we can buy loads more of that stuff. But at the moment, that kind of post-housing market renewal, that post-Pathfinder era is kind of coming to a close here now, because there's not many empties left. We still target the odd empty, but most of them there are like highly complex probate jobs and properties which are just impossible to kind of untangle or get hold of. But not impossible, but they take a long time. But we don't have a neighbourhood full of empty properties now, and some of that credit goes to us, some lot goes to Hull City Council, and a lot to some of the other organisations that work around here. But I think certainly finding ways, and it may be that this is in models other than Gyroscope, maybe citywide models, I don't know, but finding models where even maybe on a wholesale basis we can start to take over some of this stuff in the PRS, that basically you need to move stuff from the PRS and make it into some form of social housing, whether that's owned or run by the council or by Gyroscope or by Homebake or whoever. But having a city where, you know, a quarter of the houses that people live in are owned by, in effect, people from elsewhere's pension fund is not healthy. And say it's not that all these people are money grabbing like so and so's. You know, I know people that have buy-to-lets, and you know, I chastise them for doing it, but I do know people that do it, and some of them are really nice people. But when they are confronted with some of the problems that you are confronted with as a landlord, and we are confronted with, you know, these people can't cope with these situations. They can't cope with heavy-duty antisocial behaviour or heavy-duty rent arrears. And I think, you know, I'm really lucky in that, unlike the early days of Gyroscope, we now got a support team and we got people that know what they're doing around this stuff. But yeah, getting rid of all these like amateurs and idiots in the buy-to-let market would certainly be an ambition of
Excellent ambition. I'm right behind you. Paul, go on.
Yeah, can I just add to that? I mean, I couldn't agree more, and I think you're so far ahead, really, of the thinking, Martin. You know, these things go round and round, and everything's coming back to these kind of approaches, I suppose. I think the other thing that's been quite interesting here, I don't know if it's the same in Hull, but I don't know in places like Morecambe if it's the same, but the housing association sector is seen as a real problem here. So. And being driven by different business models now, so that a new approach is something that people are looking for, and our politicians are looking for, and that community-led approach. I mean, it's interesting. Projects like Homebaked and Granby 4 Streets in Liverpool have had a lot of profile, but they're tiny entities, really. And what we've got to try and do is work out how we can create this as the norm in terms of policy making. And and another thing that we went through a bit of a journey with Homebaked. Homebaked quite liked being, there were people involved with Homebaked who quite liked being seen as the agitator at the sidelines, and some people got a lot of personal profile through the project. And we had a moment where actually we were asked to be part of the kind of the regeneration master plan number 237 for Anfield, and there was a real debate and a ding dong about should we do that, and Homebake decided it should, because it should be about changing the way things are done, which I personally very strongly agreed with. But there were some people who didn't, wanted to stay on the outside, and I think that's kind of interesting bit of the conversation. And in places like Morecambe, which I know a little bit from working in Lancashire, you know, communities being encouraged and stimulated to take more of a role in this, I think is quite important.
I think the point you made about housing associations, I mean, we keep an eye on a lot of property auctions. I mean, there might be big national property auctions that, you know, there's one house in it from Hull that we might be interested in. But, you know, you go on Barnard Marcus property auctions and they will actually have the logos of housing associations on their website, i.e. we are proud to work with X, Y, and Z housing association, because housing associations are flogging off loads of their street properties. So certainly, going back to the ambition question, our ambition is not to become that, where we start building houses and say, well, actually, we love building houses and all these Victorian terraces here and there are a pain in the arse, so we're going to flog them all. But that's what housing associations do. And when they sell something in an auction, you know, your kids or your brothers or sisters or parents are not going to get a mortgage and buy them, because you've got to pay in 28 days. You know, auctions, the people at auctions are private landlords. That's who's at auctions, and investors. So when housing associations put their house in an auction, you are taking a unit of social housing that's had loads of grant on it, and you are sticking it straight into the PRS. It's a very short journey, and it's not going to go to some young family who are looking for their first house, because they ain't going to buy a property at an auction, not if they've got to get a mortgage and all the rest of it. And that, you know, I don't know, a lot of people don't seem to know that housing associations do that, and housing associations don't seem ashamed of it, because they put their logos on Barnard Marcus' website, you know, which is a strange thing.
Yes.
But these are asset transfers, and that's why I was saying about relationship with the local authority. I think housing associations, I don't know if they're ready to start giving stuff away, but certainly local authorities have plenty of buildings that they don't really know what to do with and probably cost them a fortune. And if you can, go to local authorities, you can. I think the thing's not to scrounge off your local authority, and we've tried to avoid that. We've said, look, we can do this, and this will help you. This will reduce your costs as well. Don't just be a little third sector organisation that's just always going to the council saying, oh, well, can we have some money? Can we have some money? Councils haven't got money to give away at the moment, but you can go and show them, but by doing things a different way or taking one of their bits of crappy land or crappy old buildings off their hands that they don't know what to do with, that you can save them some money and do some use of it, get some people off the waiting list.
Thank you. Yeah, Keith, did you have your hand up?
Yeah. I was just a little concerned we were getting a bit too political there. So I'm from a homelessness charity myself. We're looking at setting up. It is a very community-based organisation. It came out of Wisbech Churches Together. We developed a homelessness hostel, and we've developed other types of housing. But we've been supported massively by local housing associations, and they've encouraged us, bought property for us, rented it out, been very supportive, giving us all sorts of massive help in our locality. And I think the image that was just painted of housing associations isn't universal, and it certainly
absolutely
isn't
not. Absolutely not. No.
So with that though, the challenge for us, I agree, what we need is a comprehensive picture of where there's a portfolio of type of housing providers. And the challenge, Paul, for me, is how we set up community-based housing groups in every community. So I'm in the middle of a countryside. So I'm in Wisbech, North Cambridgeshire. Couldn't be further away from the reality of Cambridge City. We're one of the most deprived community. Well, we are the most deprived community in Cambridge. In Cambridgeshire, we are in the bottom 10% nationally. We have all the problems of inner city, but we have a population of 25,000, of which a third are Eastern Europeans. Our whole economy is based on land and food production and so on. Very low value economy. So the local housing market is not that dissimilar to Hull's and so on. And we have all the issues that you're talking about, except all our young people flee. They go to university towns. So we're a town where anybody who's got any skills just leaves the area because the only job is going into a field or a factory to can peas or pick up sprouts. So there are a number of issues. And the question simply is, if we're going to create these, how do we actually develop vast numbers of community organizations that can manage and keep local 100 houses? Effectively having 100, having 150, you can manage as a community. Get to 10,000, you're not managing it as a community because you're not part of the community where most of them are. So we need lots of communities where we have groups, absolutely like Martin, absolutely like yourself, who are prepared to look after 200, 250 homes where the community can actually run this. And it is a community. For Wisbech, 250 homes would be massive. I mean, that would be something like a tenth of our population. So it's trying to get that together. And we've got about 3 people at the moment who are interested in running this. But I can draw on a lot of ideas, but I want it to be truly across the community. We're looking at developing something specifically for people with disabilities, getting accommodation that doesn't have to be tailor-made or altered whenever somebody gets older and now needs something to lean on or a specialist bath or shower or whatever. All accommodation should be open to everyone. It shouldn't be for specific groups, but we haven't got the groundswell yet to do that, and we're trying to bring people together and give them a vision of how it could be in our rural locality.
I think the first thing I would say is, and sometimes this does come up from groups and stuff, that the feeling that you have to have the whole community there at the beginning, and that's the journey. The journey starts with a few people. It starts with 5 people around a table having a coffee and a piece of cake and a chat, and and from that you will grow. And so Homebake started from that small core group of people. Individuals came and joined, it then became incorporated. I think that's the journey that needs to take place, and to ensure that you're open and accessible to people and sharing the word about what you're doing. That's really important. I think the other thing, it was interesting, Fran said at the start of this, so I'm now running the community-led housing hub for the Liverpool City region. I have been for just over a year now. And I think there are more hubs up and down the country providing that expert support. And I think there is one in Cambridge, and I think it's drawing on them. And I think I was just doing my report for the last quarter, and we've set up about 6 new groups this year, and they're all really thriving and moving forward. And sometimes it can become a bit of a mystique. Actually, it's quite easy. You know, I set up a CLT in Toxteth, in the Toxteth community, in 6 weeks. A group came together. They wanted to do it. They've now got 120 members. These things can happen, and I think sometimes people also respond to crisis, you know, if a building's being lost to the community or something and there isn't time. So in my own community, I'm dealing with that at the minute, where a church is being closed, and the group haven't got time to get their act together. But so I think it's about preempting some of that and just getting organised, I think. But there is support out there.
I think also, you know, visiting other projects and taking potential people that are interested in doing this type of thing. I think certainly, I mean, we've always made ourselves open to visits, and I think sometimes if people can just see that it can be done, you know, you actually, I mean, all right, we got some nice pictures there on our slideshow, but actually taking people into a house before and after, you know, that can have quite a kind of powerful impact, really. And talking through the finances with people, because at first, you know, it does seem really daunting buying houses. But
yeah, and I think also, although we're in a bit of a funny time at the minute with everything, there's probably no better time to start a community-led housing project. In the bigger sense, you know, the government is very open to this if they can get their act together in releasing some of the funding and stuff, but the psychologically they're interested in this. So the timing is probably never better, and there are lots. I think that's one of the things I've loved about this network and meeting people. There are lots of really radical. What I love is there are really radical things happening in the most bizarre places. That is a real leveler, is a real connector. So linking in with Fran and what's happening in Cumbria and what's happening in Lancaster, it's just amazing, and it's very relevant to us here in Liverpool. And so I think that going to see things is really important.
Thank you, that's really helpful.
Thank you, Keith.
I'll just echo that, sorry, Fran, if that's all right, and just say that I think each scheme that's created seems to have multiple domino effects that come from it, and you know, each one inspires more to grow. That the 2 schemes in Halton have come from one Lancaster co-housing, and now there's 2 more, and they inspired me to start a community land trust where I live, and within, well, first meeting was February, and we're now in July, and I've got a site in mind. We've got 10 members, including a treasurer and a secretary. So it's happening really quickly, and I was amazed because I only recently moved to the area and didn't really know anybody, but everyone kind of jumped on the bandwagon and said, yeah, this is a good idea. So I think it can happen more easily than people would imagine.
I think that's probably true. And the other thing I would say, Keith, is scale is always worth considering. It doesn't have to be 100 houses to have a significant impact. I think often when we're talking, you know, I would say this from a Cumbria perspective, but often the rural problems are solved more easily by 5 or 10 new houses than they are by 50 or 100, because communities can buy into that much more easily and feel that they've got a stake in it. I quite see the conundrum that your particular set of circumstances provides, and it's really interesting to hear about it. And it's always useful to hear other perspectives. Certainly would recommend going to see other people doing it and take that on board. Very valuable. Okay, any other questions from the floor? Not seeing anything at the moment. I had a question for Martin, if I may, about volunteers, and you mentioned the nurturing and sometimes the comfortableness, and I just wondered if there was a journey, a turnover that you expect, that you kind of plan for. Are people with you for a year, or are they with you for longer than that?
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously with COVID, I mean, we had to suspend the volunteer program for a bit, and we have, you know, it has been back and running for a little while now. So, but with a lot less people, I think that will be a long-term change. I think we used to have too many people, and I think it often got a bit chaotic. I mean, for instance, there's a guy who's been working with us today, a guy called Robert, who has got himself a job starting on Monday. So he started working with us this week. So he's going, you know, and they wanted him, this big caravan industry in Hull, they wanted him to start today. And he said, oh no, I've got to do my volunteering for Gyroscope. So he actually told them to sort of go away until Monday. So, I mean, that guy's going to be with us a week. So sometimes it's just a tiny piece of a jigsaw. I mean, say the CSCS card, so the card that gets you onto building sites, you know, we will help train people to pass that test and pay for them to do the test and then get the card. So often people, you know, say there's just one bit of the jigsaw missing, but, you know, equally we get people coming here with like multiple kind of complex problems that just problems, but barriers to employment. And there's certain people we, you know, it's going to be nigh on impossible for them to move into paid employment. Occasionally we've employed some of these people that has had varying degrees of success. I mean, it's that comes with its own sort of complexities, and often, you know, we've taken people on and they've been elated by that, but then it's kind of stopped there. They never thought they would get that far. They got that far and then kind of stopped progressing, which is a challenge that we've got to try and sort of meet in the future, I think. But I think we're looking now to maybe develop some work experience schemes, and obviously there's stuff like Kickstart for younger people, where maybe you take people into employment for maybe 6 months or something like that. But it's agreed at the start that this will be for a limited period of time, just to get them used to that idea of budgeting with a salary rather than, you know, dealing with benefits.
On a slightly different take on the same sort of, on something you mentioned earlier, actually, that you mentioned that part of the difficulty you have is getting people with the building skills and the people skills, if you'll forgive me oversimplifying, to help people do what needs to be done as the buildings are progressing. And I'm interested in that from a building skills perspective, and the fact that we keep coming up against this conversation about, particularly about retrofitting, reclaiming derelict properties and so on, and making them, and this is another impacting question on the private rented sector stuff, bringing them up to a standard which is both decent and lettable in the future in terms of the standards it will continue to meet from energy performance. But getting people who can both do the job very well and support younger or people who don't, who aren't in the habit of the work that they're being asked to do, getting people who can do both those jobs is extraordinarily difficult. I can totally see that. But it's a massive issue for the whole building industry, and for reclaiming derelicts in particular, I think. That I don't think there's anything you can say about that apart from that it's going to continue to be difficult, but it's useful reflection, I think.
I think a lot of third sector organisations can be quite naive about it, and we probably were, but we spent so much time kind of scratching our heads about it and trying to work it out. But I mean, you know, I had someone approach me the other day from, there's quite a lot of different refugee organisations in Hull, and he's just got hold of a building, this guy, and looking to do, and he was like, approached us to say, well, can you send some of your volunteers down? And I'm like, well, no, we can't just send some people down that are often people with, say, lots of problems and barriers themselves, and they're going to come and do your building up. So his view was, can you send some volunteers down to do my building up for nothing, please? And it's like, well, no, that's not going to happen. Do your building up is going to take some expensive contractors, and if we can involve volunteers in that, fantastic. But you know, there was another project in Hull that got empty homes funding. The initial plan was to do everything using people on community payback. I mean, we have had some experience of working with people on payback over the years, and occasionally we got some real stars. But you know, a lot of people on community payback are not full of enthusiasm for the work they're doing, and the idea you're going to renovate a load of properties with people on payback. So yeah, this thing is difficult. I think to be fair, a lot of tradespeople now, you know, I mean, you know, whether it's subcontractors or people we directly employ, and it mostly is subcontractors now, but they have bought into what we do, and they know that if they don't buy into what we do, then, you know, they won't be here. But at the same time, we're not utterly precious about every single thing they do and single thing they say. You have to be realistic. But yeah, we want to make sure that people aren't being bullied or made feel uncomfortable or that type of thing. But I think people are used to gyroscope sites having women on them, having people from different ethnic backgrounds, say getting the refugees, which isn't something we do all the time, but from time to time we've done that. That's great. That just sets a kind of standard for how building sites potentially can look. But you know, you still turn up on sites and hear and see things you may not always want to hear and see.
Yeah. Okay, anybody else got any questions for Paul or Martin, or general comments about the big issue here? Shall we leave it there then? That looks good to me. I'm so very grateful for your extraordinary presentations. Thank you very much indeed, both of you. It's been a real pleasure to hear from you, and to have you answering our questions as fulsomely as you can. You know, really inspirational stuff, and we will be sharing the presentations, the information you've given us, and hopefully continuing to inspire further action, because I think that's the very best thing we can do with your knowledge is spread it around and enthuse people. It's all possible. That's what I've learned from today, is people think it's possible. Let's do this. So thank you very much indeed. Yeah, I will call it a day there, and yeah, we'll be in touch. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks all.